Thank you all for coming. First of all, today is truly a special day. Today is almost like a birthday party. And, and it's not that you think it is. Yep. Today we're sort of celebrating the birthday and creation of a new thing that AmBAR has recently put together. We call it AmBAR Sports. And AmBAR has been known for years as a basically networking platform for technology entrepreneurs, investors, and other business professionals. AmBAR is changing these days. These days we're trying to touch way more aspects of our life than just technologies. And we figure that sport is a big part of everyone's life, everyone's community's life. So we decided to develop this program. We call it AmBAR Sport. We have great plans with this program. Plans from just simply putting together a bike ride or a run or day trip to Taha, from those little things to things to help people reach some really exotic and rare destinations such as Antarctica, for example. Myself, my wife, were very lucky to travel to Antarctica last November, and even more lucky we were because my good friend, Lake Tahoe School Valley local Kyoki Flak, was also on the trip. Kyoki Flak is an international known photographer and motivational speaker, and he was kind enough to agree to do this presentation for us today. Please welcome Kyoki Flak and his presentation.
Thank you. Can I get the lights turned down just a little bit, please? You know what? Maybe just the lights in the back. That's fine. Can we see it? Okay. First of all, Siba and Galena, thank you so much for having me. I was born an artist. As a child, I was born and raised in Hawaii. I got to live and travel around Europe and different parts of the world. And then I went to art school. And when I finished art school, I felt like I had some great skills, but didn't really have any life experience to talk about. So when I was this gentleman, I took off and I spent the next 4 years traveling around the world. This is a self-portrait with a pygmy. This is the tallest man in the village. Now, I'm guessing just about everybody in this room is taller than I am. There is one place where I'm a giant. So during this time, I got to wander and just live a serendipitous life. I had no schedules. I had no appointments. Didn't have to be anywhere. And as a result, I was always exactly where I was supposed to be. And I learned to live and breathe in the moment. And it's funny because it's been a long time since I've had the opportunity to live that way. And yet it's never left me. And I now realize that my moments are very rare and special. But when they count the most, it's when everything else that I've planned goes away and I'm just present. So my base is located in Lake Tahoe, California. This is Squaw Valley. This is a picture taken in the full moon of our beautiful valley. And it became a home base from which I started traveling around the world. Once I moved there in '93, for the next 20 years, I traveled around the world on assignment for everybody from National Geographic, Men's Journal, Outside, Audubon. And I just became more and more focused on living a life of immersion. I'm guessing just about everybody in here understands the power of nature. I mean, we're living in an incredible time where things seem to be getting faster and busier, more and more technology. In fact, we are at the hub of that, in the center of the world of that right now, where we sit. And yet, even though it's moving things forward, and it serves a great purpose, its purpose is not an end in itself. And how nature affects us when we immerse ourselves in the environment, to me, is everything. And whether it's experiencing a sunrise or a sunset, those are the rare moments that remind us what it's like to be human. That's what my art is about. And one of the things that I've become very clear about is that to create art with photography is quite different than most other mediums. Now let's start with the definition of art. For me, for something to be art, first and foremost, it has to be original. To do that with photography is extremely difficult. And yet with other mediums, it's almost natural. The other component is it has to grab you and make you feel something emotionally. right? It has to make you feel something. Now, if I were to take a paintbrush and an easel and give it to two people in this room and ask them to paint the scene in front of us, they would never paint the same thing. If they were going to sculpt or use glass or wax or any other medium, just by the nature component of that media, it would be different. And yet, because of the proliferation of our technology, almost everybody's using very similar digital technology, and we are so pre-programmed about the way things are supposed to look, because we're bombarded with so many images every day, that to use that medium and do something different is extremely difficult. So this is a picture that's not about where it is. It's about what it feels like. In 2009, I finally had the opportunity to go to Antarctica. Before I went, for me, it was always this unknown place. It was this other planet, if you will. And it was this concept that I was going to go and explore someplace, be adventurous, not know exactly how it was going to work out, and experience firsthand what it's like to be there, face my fears, to do it with a teammate, and explore. On that first trip, I shot 50,000 shots. There was one that was more about the idea of exploration, about adventure, about that component, one that fit my heart and my interpretation of what I thought Antarctica was. And I got to tell you, there's so much exotica there. There's so many beautiful things to see and to experience that it's almost distracting. Now, you'll also notice that one of the big components of my work is the idea of a small person in a big space. Every one of these pictures shows someone immersed. Does anybody ski here? Okay. We used to have snow, right? Which brings me to the next idea. I think, what is the one constant in the universe? It's change, exactly. And I think we're living that firsthand right now with what's happening with our environment. People say that right now is a very difficult time for winter. I don't know. The last 3 times I've been down to the Bay, I've been blown away by how incredibly beautiful it is right now. It doesn't know that it's winter, but it's hard to call it bad. There's no such thing as bad weather. And one of the things that I really enjoy is the phone rings and I get sent to some exotic location on the planet. And my job is to basically try to translate in a single moment in time what it feels like to be there and feel that space. So I have a simple litmus test. And that test is, no matter where I am on the planet, if I had a handful of people standing behind me taking a picture at the same time, if they would have taken a similar picture, it might be a great photograph, but it's not art. Only when I'm interpreting uniquely, because only I feel things the way I do, or anybody for that matter. Everybody has their own perception of the universe. Only when they are translating uniquely in their own way what they're experiencing does it truly become art. Hopefully, it's something that's timeless. Something that no matter who you are, where you're from, it makes you feel something. I mean, if you were sitting in this meadow, experiencing your friend playing with you, that's a sensation that touches your heart. It makes you feel like you're a kid inside. This dog is actually 15 years old, and yet it thinks it's a puppy. And I can tell you, I'm amazed that its ability to walk or move is challenged as it gets older and older, and yet it has these moments where it completely forgets its own age and who it is. Excuse me, folks. Okay, the pictures were being cropped. From being that I was born and raised in Hawaii, I'm completely unexposed or unused to the snow. And even though I've spent the last 25 years living in the mountains, it's still magical every time it snows. So for me, I was looking for a picture. I spent almost a decade trying to find it that explains what it feels like. What's magical about being outside when it's snowing? Because if you describe things falling out of the sky to somebody who's never seen it, it's not this open ethereal thing. It's actually a retraction. I don't want to get hit. It's going to be something that actually is the opposite of what it feels like. So how do you explain that? Words don't do the job. And yet, hopefully by finding an image that's ethereal and light, it almost can touch you and makes you understand that magical connection. Again, it's about human immersion. How does it feel when we immerse ourselves in this space, wherever the environment is, whatever the colors are, whatever the timing is, whatever's the mood? It stops all the things that are, it basically separates us from the artificial commercial world and basically stops time and makes us stop and breathe and feel what it's like to be alive. Well, this was a picture that was taken in 2011 when we had more snow than anywhere else on the planet. You got to kind of wonder if that's ever going to happen again. And yet, if you were to go to Japan right now, it's happening right now. And I think that sense of as our planet progresses, our ability to start seeing ourselves as part of the whole and realizing that there's different experiences of immersion that keep changing from location to location, it's almost like we're collectively sharing that overall experience. Well, this is probably one of my most famous pictures. It's a picture that it's called Nine Dog Sunrise. I came up with the idea that the dogs are the ultimate metaphor of why we live in the mountains. As long as they're outside having fun, living in the moment, there's nothing else that matters, especially when they're sharing it with their friends. So I convinced Ski Magazine to let me focus on it, and I spent 2 years photographing the dogs. And the purpose was to try to photograph it from their perspective. If I really wanted to gain insight to why we live in the mountains, then the trick was to show it from their perspective. So we got all the dogs together, we got them to the top of the mountain, and I shot a picture of them all looking at me. And when I took the picture, I had 9 human beings, their trainers, standing behind me, grabbing their attention. I shot a whole roll of film, and I documented them all there. At a certain point, I ran out of film, and I went around back to put more film in the camera. And as I was finishing loading, all of a sudden I realized the scene had gotten quiet. Before that, it was animated. There was dogs barking, there was humans talking, there was all these things going on. So I turned around, and I saw all the dogs and all the humans looking at the sun coming up over the lake. And it was amazing. They went from this animated, completely distracted scene of having fun with their friends to a moment where they completely got lost in what it felt like to be alive in that space. So I'm watching this going, oh my God, even the dogs get it. And as I'm watching this one dog turns around and looks at me and is like, take the picture. This is your moment. So, so much of what I do with my ideas creatively is to come up with a cool concept. I get friends together and we go off to some place around the world to try to document it. But at a certain point, it's about letting go. Letting the moment take charge of itself. And that's where our technologies really help, because nowadays, with the autofocus mechanisms and all these programs and things, we don't even really have to look through the camera to be able to capture a moment that's going to work. And as a result, you can be more and more present in the moment while you're having it. So, the trip to Antarctica, I've now done this trip 3 times. And I guess one of the questions I want to pose to the audience is, how many times have you had the most amazing trip in your life and you went to go do it again and it was even better the second time? How about the third time? So I'm scratching my head, I'm trying to ask myself, why? And we do these extraordinary things. We fly down to Ushuaia, which is the southernmost city in the world. We get on a boat, we cross the most radical sea in the world on this cruise ship with 100 different people from around the world. These are people from Russia, France, Sweden, the United States, Canada, all over the place. And there's one thing we all had in common. We all loved mountain. Or maybe we all were in search of adventure. It's the perfect mix, because what happens is there's enough unknown and enough tension and enough fear. I mean, I crossed the Drake Passage once with 60-foot waves on a very small boat. And it's a discussion that a lot of people have been thinking about. This is not a trip you just decide tomorrow to do. You actually spend a lot of time thinking about and preparing and training. And in a way, it takes the oldest person and makes them a child again. Why? Because it's about exposing yourself, taking a chance, and experiencing life as it unfolds. the natural component of what you experience on a day in and day out when you're down there. I mean, with all the effort to get down to Ushuaia and get on the boat and cross the passage, we only have 7 days on the continent. And during those days, again, you have no control. You have a general plan, but the boat comes around a corner and there's a big wall of ice, so it can't go further. So we take a right turn and we end someplace else. And eventually we find a place where we can throw an anchor. The captain's comfortable that we're not going to get encapsulated in ice. And they take a Zodiac ashore and they come back and they said it's on. And next thing you know, you load up with all your teams. For every 4 humans, there's a guide. And you go off together and you explore. Now, a lot of these guides bring their professional, they bring their clients who they've been skiing with and around the world for a long time, and they convince them to go with them to Antarctica so that they get to have the experience. Well, imagine having a guide where it's your job to keep everyone safe, but you're going to a place you've never been before. Again, there's an unknown component that seems to be an everyday experience out there. And that immersed in this incredible pure nature. You see things that just seem surreal, and yet every time you take a breath and you smell the air and you see the purity around you, it really feels like you're on a different planet. One that we haven't destroyed. I guess you could say that most of the people in this boat are not normal. You know, it's the water is about 30 degrees. On the normal cruise ship, this boat does this trip probably 20 times a season, and they always offer the plunge. And usually there's a list, and there'll be maybe 10 people who sign up. And when they sign up, they come down and they put a seatbelt with a rope around them, and they literally jump off the bottom ramp, which is only about a foot off the water, into the water, and they jump back out. And in past trips, our guides and guests kind of got a little carried away, so before they offered this to the public, they once again warned us that there's no jumping off the upper deck, and you have to wear a seatbelt, and you have to sign up. Well, not everybody listened, of course. And it's hard to explain what it's like to go into water that's 40 degrees. And I can't tell you how many conversations I had with friends who were on the boat, who some said they're going to do it, some said they wouldn't. And my point is, what can't you do for 15 seconds? Right? I mean, you're not going to get hurt. You might have fear of really cold weather. But if you override those fears and you focus, it's amazing what you experience. Such as simple as going in the water.
No big deal.
So when we went ashore, because we're on an area where we didn't know where we were going, and there's glaciers and crevasses everywhere, we were tied by a rope. What a great opportunity. Since so much of what I'm trying to do creatively is no longer try to document or record what I'm seeing, or stop and control it, but just to participate in it. I mean, I tell people my job is my best excuse. Why? Well, I get to live the experience. When you're tied to a rope with a team, if you stop and you try to take a picture without keeping up, then you're going to jerk the guy in front of you, who jerks the guy in front of him, and the guy in front of them. And it doesn't work. So it really forces you to practice what you're talking about. Now, the other thing that I loved about this experience is not only is it people from around the world, it's all different ages. Alexia was 9 years old. She somehow convinced her dad that she needed to go. And to justify it, they decided to make an educational program out of it. So we went to 2 different penguin rookeries, and using a satellite phone and a video, she had a live link to her school. And she got her classmates to ask her questions about what it was like to be standing in this place, experiencing Earth this way. Chimstrap penguins, or penguins in general, are this really strange creatures. Almost everybody in this room probably has a predefined idea of penguins as fun, loving, playful creatures. Quite frankly, they're stinky and loud, and there's not, I mean, there's some, it just shows you how much we've been pre-programmed by our media to look at that shape and assume that it's this fun, playful thing. One of the things that, again, that I liked about this trip more than anything was the fact that you're in this cruise ship, and you might be looking around the deck, but when it came time to get out, you basically get all geared up. You have more ski gear than you've ever had in your life. And then right before you get off the boat, they make you put a life vest on top of everything else. Of course, you have to bear your ice axe and your crampons and any pointed objects because it'll pop the raft. And there's all these variables. But when you finally get out and you get in the raft and you pull away from the boat, there's this incredible experience and feeling of just raw, beautiful nature. And you're not alone. Just you and 100 of your best friends. Oops, excuse me. And, you know, all these different groups of people came together and enjoyed the moment. The guide would basically help them do their thing, and you could see the ship in the background. I mean, there's just nothing normal about this experience. But after the second and the third and the fourth day, it became pretty ordinary. Well, not ordinary, extraordinary, but it was something that we became very comfortable with. Now, this was a picture that was actually taken from the first time I went down, and a little bit more on the steeper extreme side. I was actually working on the film crew for Warren Miller. For someone who's had the opportunity to ski all over the world, it's just really amazing, the visuals and how it affects the experience. And then, you know, you get this great experience where you actually earn your turn. So you spend an hour to 2 hours sweating to get up there, and you ski down and you hang out with the penguins again. And it's just something very strange about that, and very joyful. Everything about this trip was unpredictable. This was a blue crevasse ice chamber that we got to explore. You know, ever since I was a kid, I was fascinated with what it would be like to be. I watched the Superman movie, and I saw his bluest ice temple, and I kept saying, "What an incredible place to live." What's amazing is what it feels like to be in this space. I was lucky enough that I went in with one of the first groups, and when it was time, everybody had to take their turn, and when it was time for our group to leave, I got permission from my guide, and I disconnected from the rope, and they went on without me, and I got to stay in this ice chamber for almost 2 hours as every group came in. And what I got to see was the reflection of the experience and what it felt like to be alive in that moment from all the people who I'd spent time on the boat with as they came in and went, "Oh my God." And it was like they were all kids, living and breathing and feeling something they never felt before. And when it's all done, you get back on the boat and you face the Drake Passage and you head home. Now we're going again in November, and I personally invite every one of you to join us. I thought I'd get over this, and the reality, I don't think you'll ever get over going to what feels like another planet, where being alive on a day-to-day basis and sharing it with other people you don't know in a way that's unpredictable and at the same time exhilarating. You know, not everybody skied, but everybody every day immersed themselves in a day-to-day experience that they've never had before, and that was contagious. So in my career, I've had a chance to work with some incredible people. These are people who do the impossible. I was there when Jim Rippey did the first backflip on a snowmobile. That's 500 pounds upside down. Before he did this day, they said it was impossible. And yet he had a vision. And he really wasn't a professional snowmobiler, but he did that kind of thing on a snowboard and had done it for a long time and just realized that it was possible. And so he basically set about to be the first person on planet Earth to make that happen. So many of these people have their own perspective of the world. Now, one of the things that I find fascinating is this is a picture of Shane McConkey skiing a line in Squaw Valley. It's not like when you watch these people who do the impossible that you think you can do it. I mean, I've spent 10 years photographing these people who they tell me what they're going to do. I photographed them doing it, and I still can't believe they did it. And the last thing I think, having gone through the process, is that I can do it. So how do they do it? How do these individuals do things that seem impossible to everybody else? This is one of our locals. This is Johnny Mosley, gold medalist, and he did a cross backflip off an 80-foot cliff. And he told us he was going to do it first, and he made it happen. Now, all these people have a support system. They have people in their lives who reach out and give them a hand. They're brought into an environment where they imagine things that are not possible. I mean, isn't the whole tech revolution that's happened right in this ground zero, isn't it about people who imagine things that have never been? I guess the first step is to first define where that boundary is, to really see where that mark is and start to envision yourself doing something beyond that. And I've thought about it and I've talked about it and I've really enjoyed these individuals. And yet, when I had the next experience that I'm going to share with you, I didn't see it coming. In fact, it was the last thing in the world that I thought would ever happen. So I'm 47 years old and I get invited to join a couple friends who live in Tahoe. The plan was there was 2 paraplegic athletes who wanted to be the first guys to ski to the South Pole. It had never been done before. Now these are guys who cannot walk. One of them was in a wheelchair and who'd been a paraplegic athlete for more than half of his life. And the other one had been injured for less than a year. Grant Corrigan was out working on a film. He was a professional snowmobiler. He did a giant gap with a snowmobile and he overshot his landing by 2 feet. So instead of landing in the steep section, he landed in the flat, and the compression caused him to crush his spine. And he was lucky to make it. They care flighted him out, and when he came to in the hospital, his wife of 4 months, his love of his life, was by his side and was crying, and the diagnosis wasn't very good. In fact, they said he'd never walk again. And she looked into his eyes and basically said, "Don't you dare change any of our dreams. We are going to stay positive, we're going to work through this, and we're going to perform a miracle." So they started their journey. And when I met them, they were 7 months out. And they decided what better way than to practice the recovery than to do it through action. So when they got the opportunity, because somebody else dropped out, to join this team, what perfect way to regain control of your feet and to do this by doing something that no one's ever done before. So that year we spent doing 4 trips in different locations around the planet preparing for this trip. There was all these questions that we had to figure out. The first and foremost was we had to develop a chair and a device that they could actually sit in and push themselves. How will they deal with the cold if they have no feeling in their legs? How will they go to the bathroom? How are they going to walk? They can't do any of these things. And we set out doing it. Now, I was asked, this is actually in Norway, and we went on to Spitsbergen in Svalbard in the Arctic, and the goal was for us to basically start the training, and my job was to shoot commercial stills of them that we would then sell it to corporate so that they could get the money to finance this whole trip. And I enjoyed it, and when I got back to Tahoe, they were doing another training where they were going to circumnavigate Lake Tahoe, and they asked me to join them. Now, they asked me in the very beginning if I wanted to ski to the South Pole, and I said, no, I don't do those kind of things, just like I'm not going to climb Everest. I'm a photographer, not an athlete. I don't do these things. I had a boundary that I'd set for myself. Whether it was real or not, I had no intention. After 5 days of paddling around Lake Tahoe, I was emotionally hooked. The idea of what they were going to accomplish, the positive mindset that came out of every thought and every interaction that I had with Grant was contagious. And then they started talking about finding another photographer to go to the South Pole, because I don't go to the South Pole. And I woke up the next day and I'm like, wait a minute, someone's going to finish my job? So I went to our expedition leader, who happens to be a neighbor and a dear friend, and I've done a bunch of trips with him. And I said to him, Doug, I want to go on this trip. I have to do this. And he looked at me, he goes, you're kidding. You're out of shape and you're a junk show. I said, what? He goes, you leave things unzipped, you fall over, you're an amazing artist, but I'm not taking you to the South Pole, you won't make it. Of course, all I heard was no. So I thought about it for a day, and I was like, who is this guy to tell me no? And I talked to my other teammates, and they're like, oh, you can do this, you got to do this with us, you're in. Of course, none of them had ever been there, only the expedition leader. So I don't know, I just decided to do it, and I decided there was nothing more important in my life in that moment, and I started training. Now, my training was to drag a tire to the top of the mountain 4 to 5 days a week. After 3 months, I was actually thinking I could do this. And we got all our gear together and prepared, and again, I'm kind of the guy who wings things, and all of a sudden now I was lined up to do something that I wasn't sure I could pull off, but I had to. Again, another question for you. When's the last time you decided to do something that you weren't sure you could do? Isn't that really what humans are about? And yet it's something that we don't practice or do very much anymore. So here we are in Punta Arenas, and it's day. We're about to get on our plane. I look up at the marquee, and instead of having a city or a town that we fly to, which anybody who travels around planet Earth is used to, there's a sign that says a continent, Antarctica, and I realized that it was going to be a very different experience. So we get on the Solution Jet, and you'll notice this is a picture of Grant saying goodbye to Shauna. And this is something that happened in all of our trips. There was always this point. She would travel with us to that last moment, and then she would say goodbye as we went off to do what we did. And she was always there, and that love and that support was such a huge part of Grant's know-how. Now, in the trip before, when we were in Patagonia, the other athlete had gotten injured. He ended up rubbing all the skin off of his backside, and then got very sick, and after 2 months of being in the hospital, he had to pull out. And it was one of the hardest things I had to face because, first of all, he was a friend of 20 years, and he was a close friend with all the teammates, and all of a sudden it was clear that he was more of a liability, he couldn't go, and it was really hard to stay positive and think about, well, how anything could be positive with this. And as you'll hear in the story, it was a critical part of this journey that made the fairy tale ending that happened. So we get on this plane and we cross the Drake Passage via air, and we land in the middle of the continent on an ice runway. This is a 5-kilometer runway of solid ice, no brakes, and the plane lands and coasts to a stop. And, Union Glacier, which is the spot, it was cold, but not unreasonable. There was mountains. It's still a place that felt very familiar to me. It's someplace, having been all over the planet, there was a lot I could identify with. There was a lot of things that I could share. We had a day to gear up, and then we got onto a DC-3 with skis, and it flew us out onto the plateau and dropped us off 1 degree before the South Pole. When it landed, this is actually 11 o'clock at night. At this time of year in Antarctica, the sun never sets. And I walked away from the plane as they were unloading, and of course, I kind of felt a little bit like the Michelin Man with all the clothes, and I realized this is something I'd prepared for so long, and this was it, because the plane was about to fly away, and I'm thinking, wow, man, I got this. It's great. I feel good. And just, amazed by the journey of the last year and how it got to this point. And then the plane flew away. And it got smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's when I realized there was no turning back. So Doug decided that we'd push. Since 11 o'clock at night, we were just going to get kept a couple miles under a belt, and we pushed for 3 hours. Now, we had heard a lot about this experience, but again, none of us had ever been there or had that experience. And at 40 to 50 below zero, there is so much friction that skis and sleds don't slide. It's like you're sticking to things and you're trying to drag. And the amount of energy it took in that first departure, we pushed for probably 2 hours, and we set up camp and went through all the motions, and we're all thinking, wow, this is pretty hard, even though we've been training for it. And then after we had some food and we were sitting around camp, somebody asked the question, how far did we go? So we pulled out the GPS and we did our readings, and in 2.5 hours we hadn't gone a mile. So we did the math. We had enough food for 12 days. We weren't going to make it, not at that pace. And I just remember going to bed thinking, well, something's got to change. What Grant did, from that point on, he woke up with a vengeance. And we realized that the key for him was to keep him moving. Now, the problem is people who have a paralysis not only do they have no feeling in their legs, they have very little control of their sweat glands. So if he exerted himself too much, he would sweat too much, and then that would freeze and it would get cold. He had electrodes attached to his legs so that they could keep track of the temperature so he couldn't get frostbite. And basically, he was like an indie racer, and he would basically communicate with one of the guides, and they would feed him as he moved. But he basically did it. We all, as a team, all worked with him to make sure that he didn't have to stop, and he was the one that set the pace for us. Now, it became very clear instantly for me that all my past experiences in life didn't apply. I mean, I'd spent the last 20 years exploring exotica, right? These incredible places with amazing people at all the right times. And it was always about integrating my subjects into the environment. Well, all of a sudden I was in a place where there was nothing. 9,000 feet of solid ice and nothing in every direction. No living organisms. you cannot survive or function out there. It's a place that you might as well be on the moon. And you would have these days where you would drag your sled with everything you have until Grant basically had enough, and he would signal ahead. They would set up camp, and with his last strength, he would roll into camp. We'd wake up the next morning, and the wind had blown away our tracks, and you couldn't tell you had gone anywhere. So in addition to having this experience, our job was to film it and record it. And for the first time, for me, it really brought challenges and it put perspective into what I was doing. I had taken for granted, for so often, all the privilege I had as a cameraman working for great clients. They gave me helicopters, they gave me boats, whatever I needed, right? And the athletes took the risk, I got the shot, and that was my job. And it was easy. In fact, I had no reason to change it. It was unfolding in a beautiful way, and I was having this great experience. All of a sudden, I was a place that every time I wanted to do something, it came with a price. At night, we would gather in the tent. Every day we would call in and talk to a school in the States and answer questions from kids, and they would call in our stats from our GPS so they knew where we were. And we got to talk. But really, during the day, we were by ourselves. And what initially was just about me trying to translate what this tiny person in this big space was about really became a journey within. And I was struggling with, how do I find a way to translate what nothingness looks like? So I gave a string to one of my teammates, and I had to make a circle around me, and then I had the entire team stand in the circle. This is 6 pictures put together, 360 degrees of nothingness. The rules are different. There was a parallax, like a dome of light, that would come out on certain days. And it was almost a force field protecting them as they moved through space. And then the whiteout would roll in, to the point where you couldn't tell which way was up or down, forward or backwards. And it made you start rethinking about, if you can't see all these things, how do you measure progress? And it was cold. Functioning in the cold is a hard thing to explain. All I can tell you is it's hard to think. It became this testimony of will. And what I saw Grant do was beyond anything I've ever seen a human do. And he was unrelentless. He was never once stopped. He just kept pushing forward. And I'd hear him muttering, and he was saying these mantras over and over again. His motto is possibility through positivity. As long as I stay positive, anything is possible. And he wasn't talking about getting to the South Pole. He was talking about that day getting as far as they could. When we were filming this, we were doing audio and motion and stills, and we could do everything we want as long as we didn't get in the way. So every time I wanted to get a camera angle, I'd have to head a new direction. When it came time to taking pictures, I literally would disconnect my sled. I'd start taking pictures, and as they were moving, it was my job to keep up. And at a certain point, this is our film crew, at a certain point, I'd get so, the first 30 seconds, 45 seconds, I would take my mitts off while I was taking pictures, and I had liners, but then 45 seconds, it felt like someone was sticking needles in my hands. Within a couple minutes, I couldn't feel my hands. And I would usually go for another 2 or 3 minutes, and at that point I'd get scared because I couldn't feel my hands and I wasn't sure what was going to be next. So I'd walk all the way back to my sled, I would put my overcoat on, I would put my mitts on, I would force blood back into my hands, I would drink some tea, I'd eat a little food, have a conversation with myself, and I'd look up and they would be that big. And I would spend the next 2 hours chasing them down, trying to catch them again. So you would think after the 4th, 5th, 10th time you did this, you'd say, is it really worth taking the picture? Why don't you just keep up, don't get in the way. No, that would be way too easy, right? And it really, for the first time, I felt like it put a value on my creative and allowed me to really quantify energetically the value of that moment in time as I translate it with my camera. I did mention I was born and raised in Hawaii, right? So flip-flops, board shorts, and a surfboard. I'm not really sure how I got here. I'm not even sure where here was. All I know is that most of the time, I was having a conversation with myself. I was thinking and talking with my teammates, but mostly just having thoughts that I've never had before. And I started to realize that so often in my life I had limited myself. I had not done things that I could have done. I mean, we all set boundaries for ourselves, right? But they're not real. And only if we test them do we really know where those limits are. Now, it's hard to explain what Grant did. As I mentioned, I've spent 20 years photographing these extreme athletes doing crazy things. This was beyond that. But here's an idea. Go home, get a cardboard box, and sit in the cardboard box. Take 2 sticks and try to push yourself across the carpet. Because with that much friction, that's what it's like. He literally was pushing with his arms. It's hard. In fact, most people will try for 30 seconds and give up. If you're really stubborn, you'll push your way across the carpet in an hour and a half, maybe? If you're lucky, depends on how big the carpet is and what the shag is. Bottom line is, you'll only do it if you stay positive and you're unrelenting and you don't give up. Grant Corrigan's probably the most positive person I've ever met, and it never changed. It was the only reason why he was successful. So, 12 days later, we're at our destination. This is the home stretch. This has been a year in preparation. You can see Grant in the middle, Doug Stout, the expedition leader, and Tal Fletcher on the right. And they're all on microphones. And we've got 3 cameramen. And what we told Grant was that our director was also going to be at the South Pole to help film the ending. So at this point, Grant turns to Tal and says, you know, I'm so grateful. This is it. This is my moment. I know we've all worked for this, and I know it's supposed to be this big celebration, and I'm not happy. In fact, I can't understand this. It doesn't make sense. Without my love, without Shauna, my wife, I couldn't be doing any of this. So how is it possible this is a life-defining moment for me, and she's not here? I mean, and you know, he's going on and on and on. So what does Tal do? Tal turns to him and says, dude, it's the South Pole. You know, I mean, get it together. You'll see your wife in a week, please. We're filming. You know, work with us here. So he does. And they're now 100 feet from the pole. And this is the 100th anniversary when Scott was there for the first time. And Grant gets out of his chair, and this is something that he was just intent on doing. He did not want to push the last bit in the chair. So he gets out of the chair and he borrows a ski from each of his teammates. And he skis the last 100 feet to the pole. And it's just one of the most incredible things. I mean, we all knew this was going to happen, and yet being part of it and watching it was just incredible. And there's this huge celebration, and there's a crowd that forms. You know, big crowd. And in the crowd, there's a hooded figure who comes up. and she comes right up to Grant, and of course he's hugging everybody, and you can't really tell who it is. And all of a sudden, she pulls away her mask, and it's Sean and his love there in his moment. At which point, of course, we all start crying, and it's this incredible moment. And then a few minutes later, my other friend and cameraman, Tom Day, starts yelling, and I'm like, and I'm ignoring him because I'm firing away, taking pictures, and he's yelling, and I'm like, what's up? And apparently he was crying so hard that a tear froze his camera to his face. So, of course, what I do, I run to my sled, and I get out the tea, and I'm pouring it on his head, and pulling the camera off, and it's this really incredible moment, and it was such an incredible culmination, and I realized, even though what I just saw, what Grant just did was more incredible physically than anything I've ever seen a human being do, and it wasn't even about that. This wasn't about the physical overcoming your odds. It was about the power of love and staying positive. So what do you do? I mean, how do you go on from here? It was just this incredible thing. So, and Doug, this is actually the geographic South Pole, and Doug was our expedition leader, was the one who got us there. And I just can't imagine. He's done this now for, I think, 12 times, and yet this trip was unlike any one he'd ever done before. And I couldn't help but think that he was really thinking about what this meant. So, of course, you get great Facebook pictures. This is Grant with GPS at 90.000. There's only one place on planet Earth you can get it. This is Grant pole dancing at the South Pole. This is Grant skiing around the world. This is our team at the South Pole. We're all standing in different time zones. And here we are high-fiving. Now, our goal with this movie, which will be coming out hopefully by summertime, is to raise awareness for this foundation. It's called the High Fives Foundation. They're based out of Truckee. They're a 501(c)(3). They help winter sports athletes who have debilitating accidents, help them get back and get positive and make a difference. And the idea is that if somebody like Grant can ski to the South Pole, what can't you do? And again, this has now been 2 years since we've been there, and everything's changed. All of us, we all knew it was going to be a special thing to see this happen, and we flew back in, and the governor of Nevada was there to meet us, and it was on the front page of the Chronicle, and there was all these things going on. And yet, the day-to-day message for me is what you can do if you stay positive and if you have love in your life. Everything I'm doing now is different. Everything that I look at, everything I see, I'm going back to places I've been before, and nothing's the same. It's exactly the same place. So what's changed? Me. Perspective is everything. Again, I challenge you to ask yourself, what boundaries have you set for yourself? What have you decided that you cannot do? Is it real? Only by testing those things and pushing beyond them do you realize that anything is possible. It's now affecting what we're doing with my gallery and my art. We're using new technologies where we're taking a true photograph, and there's a couple examples. We're laminating behind glass. But instead of taking a piece and then seeing where it fits, we first start by finding a place. Someone with a space, a commercial space, a big home, and we ask them silly questions. How do you want it to feel? When somebody walks in your home and they've never met you, what is the emotion that you want to impact them with? And then we design the piece virtually and then build it after we've come to the final solution. So it's not us telling the person what works, it's them deciding what is the message that they want to give to anybody, to themselves every time they're there, and to anybody who shares their space with them. And there's no limit to what you can do with it. Now, we can only see 160 degrees, and yet we experience the world in 360. So by taking stitches and photographing pictures beyond the line of human sight, you're actually creating an image that's much more what something feels like than what it looks like. The challenge is most walls won't hold it. The first time I took this picture, which was 300 degrees, and I built it 10 feet long, it was only 6 inches tall. And it was only when we built it to 30 feet and run it down a stairwell. And not only is it on 3 planes, but it's not even symmetrical. And yet the impact, how it feels every time you're in this space. This is a gorgeous home up in Squaw Valley. And there's the great room, there's the dining room, there's the bedroom, and everything is just incredibly done. The favorite room in the house now for the people who live there is the stairwell, because of how it makes them feel. And I realize it's important because you know, their home in the mountains is a huge part of who they are as a family, and it's the value system they're passing on. And there's no limitations to the elemental component, so it's a way of bringing in the natural world into your space. For those of you who haven't been to Squaw Valley, I would like to welcome you to come and join us. We have events in the summer and the winter where we have new image releases, we share pictures, we have slideshows. We had a complete slideshow that was just dedicated to the last trip to Antarctica that happened over Christmas time. And there's another one this week, but I would again ask you to come. If this is something that you guys enjoy or would like to learn more about, there's some brochures and books, and I just want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to my story.